Welcome everybody to this lunch lecture. We are the last one in a series of different ones. I think this is a special opportunity because we will have a guest today, Dr. Vivi Niemenmaa from Helsinki. My name is André Müller. I'm a teacher here, in fact, at the department. And we decided to bring you a bit closer to the SDGs, the so-called Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. I see some familiar faces on my courses, so some of you might have already a knowledge of what the SDGs are. We will in fact focus on Finland because you might know that Finland is a country that is supposed to be from tradition sustainable. And as all countries of this planet, they also deal with the SDGs. So it would be, I think, very helpful to understand by this lecture how Finland is dealing or coping with the SDGs. And Vivi and me, we had the idea, in fact, to do this lunch lecture a bit in a different style. So in fact, to have 3 blocks and hopefully to discuss with you. Because you're the audience, you might have ideas, you want to reflect on what we tell you, and particularly Vivi is going to tell you. So yeah, I hope, be prepared and stressed, but yeah, if you want to get rid of something, if you want to tell us something, please do so. Oops, sorry. In fact, we want to start with, there is a couple of scientific work on the SDGs already available. And there is one study that had been carried out last year by a bunch of scientists on online available reports, scientific articles. And one of them we would like, in fact, to cite because it makes clear that the SDGs, they are there. It's a UN document of the United Nations, but they have to be implemented, or they are asked to be implemented, or people try to implement them. And it's interesting to see what these guys figured out by carrying out a meta-study on 3,000 articles, that in fact this is a process. So there is already some evidence that discussions have been started in different countries, that some groups are working with them, some institutions, but their result, in fact, of this study is to say, well, their transformative power is still limited, or at least the evidence is not there and that clear. So we still need more approaches to deal with the SDGs in normative terms, in legislative terms, in terms of resource allocation. And I think it's once again a wonderful opportunity to have Vivi with us, in order to tell us how Finland is part of this process. So once again, 3 blocks. We will tell you something about, let's say, the policy coherence of the SDGs. We will detail some kind of a long-term perspectives. Once again, this is a process. The SDGs had been agreed upon by all member states in 2015, and 2030, the target is still ahead of us. And that is also the meaning of this lecture, to say halfway done. Are we already done, or do we still have to do a lot of work which is ahead of us? And it was particularly Vivi's understanding to talk about spillovers in order to make clear that this is not an island we are working on, but it has a lot of, let's say, effects on different other areas. Okay, you might be aware of these nice icons, and they will guide us, in fact, through this lunch lecture, because we will talk about a lot of numbers. And if you're not familiar with the SDGs, you might get lost in this bunch of numbers. So yeah, that was our understanding. Vivi, are you ready to start with the first block? Perfect. Vivi, by the way, I didn't mention this, sorry for that. It was announced that she is Deputy Director of the National Audit Office of Finland. Audit means she is the one screening the national budget of Finland and telling the parliament where the budget is sustainable or unsustainable. And in fact, she had been promoted, so she is now the Secretary General of an international group dealing with exactly this. And at the same time, she lectures at the University of Helsinki and the Department of Geography and Geosciences. So she is, in fact, by education a geographer. I'm not, I'm an urban planner. And in that respect, she can tell you a lot about the geography, let's say, of the SDGs. Vivi.
So hello everyone, it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm also like really very curious to hear your comments on what I'll be talking to you. Maybe to add to my presentation, like in the role of Secretary General, I lead a global group of auditors specializing in environment and climate, and we very much like integrate also the SDGs into our work. So that's maybe really like my perspective to the topic. And in this global working group, which consists of 83 countries, we've also worked a lot with policy coherence. And then in this collaboration with University of Helsinki, with students, we've discussed a lot with spillovers. And like national audit offices or court of auditors, it depends a little bit of the structure in various countries. In Germany, it would be Rechnungshof. So we do not do science. We do more like really practice-oriented like assessments of government actions and how they implement policies. But for instance, in Finland, many of our performance auditors, I talk about performance auditing because there's also financial auditing, and that's I don't know too much about that, to be honest, in detail. So we have many people with research backgrounds. So we've hired many people with PhD. So this knowing a little bit about let's say, like science and especially like methodologies and their limitations and so on is very useful also in the assessments that we do. Okay, I could start with this slide, which kind of explains the two traditions on which the SDGs kind of exist. So first of all, in the left-hand side, we have the so-called Rio process that started 30 years ago in this big first Sustainable Development Summit in Rio, held in Rio de Janeiro. That's why it's called Rio process. And then there were these follow-up meetings, Rio +10, Rio +20. And even though this process was very much about sustainable development, very much about interlinking environment, economy, and social aspects, it was still in many countries, how would I say, tiny bit of focused in the environment, or it was so at least in Finland, like the minister who was responsible of the topic was Ministry of Environment. And once we, for instance, in the National Audit Office did a review of the governance of sustainable development, we pointed out like, hey, if you want to be cross-cutting, that's not the right place. And quite soon after that, they moved it to the Prime Minister's office. Like otherwise, it is like sustainable development is only seen as an environmental topic. So that's also kind of important where a certain topic is located when it comes to governance structure. So we have the so-called Rio process. Then on the other hand, we have the Millennium Development Goals, which were really targeted only to Global South, to developing countries. And therefore, for instance, in Global North, like the people who were dealing with MDGs were mainly people associated with development policies. So now, when these two traditions came together in the SDGs, it was also this maybe tiny bit of tensions in the beginning, like a bit of this ownership and people looking at the SDGs from maybe a bit of like different angles. But anyway, like just to stress that it indeed has these two tiny bit of different routes where the how the SDGs were born. And coming to the Rio process, what was interesting, I started my work career with oh my God, 90s, in the end of 90s, I'm so old, yeah, with the local agenda 21. And that's, it was interesting in this Rio Declaration and the, it was a particular stress on how local authorities, cities, should do their own or urging local authorities to their own sustainable development strategies. So that was what Local Agenda 21 was about, and it was quite a strong movement, at least in parts of Europe, and in Finland, and a lot of cities were actively like getting into terms like what does sustainable development mean for us? We're developing sustainable development indicators, we're involving citizens, we're doing these sustainable development strategies. And now when I compare to the SDGs, there's not such a strong specific emphasis on like, okay, we call all cities to do their own processes. Like certainly it is in there, but it's not so specific as it was in the Rio process, where there was this own brand called Local Agenda 21. And looking back, like where are we now, for instance, in Finland, I'd say it's three main directions what cities have taken. First is definitely like climate change and climate neutral municipalities or cities. That's definitely something. Like still in the end of 90s or early 2000, climate wasn't such a big issue. So it was maybe quite a natural development then that, okay, you first talked about sustainable development, it might have been a bit like, ooh, too broad and vague and so on. So then you took the climate as your focus. Then another focus area for many cities is circular economy. So many municipalities have kind of created their strategies around that concept. And it's altogether quite a strong concept in Finland because a Finnish foundation called Sitra has been one of the world leaders in developing the whole circular economy concept. And then the third direction is this broad sustainable development work that some municipalities have continued. So really climate, circular economy, and large sustainable development. Oops, yeah, here I have the SDGs. And then, I was trying to see, here, sorry, yeah. Because I can't see them myself, I thought there's something else. But okay, this slide is an analysis of SDG priorities in Finnish cities. So it tries to visualize what are from the SDG perspective the most important topics. So really it's a climate work. It's increasing, it's the inequalities and economy and employment. So those are the major topics nowadays. And here we have, of course, the SDGs. Sorry. So what I wanted to say about the background for the SDGs. So very in the beginning, it might have been easier for developing countries actually to start to work with the SDGs because of the Millennium Development Goal tradition. So they kind of understood, okay, we have now these certain goals, we have indicator systems, we know how to report, And it was maybe this time like more for the global north that were a bit puzzling, like, okay, like, so what are these and what are we supposed to do and how do we get into terms with them? And And then, on the other hand, like in countries like Finland and also in Germany, there were these existing sustainable development strategies and own national maybe targets, and then suddenly the SDGs came, so it was more like, oh, like how do we now integrate this into our existing framework? And quite interestingly, for instance, Finland like first did a gap analysis of the SDGs, like trying to find those SDGs where you're performing worst, for instance, climate, and then kind of building the strategy around it. But then when the strategy was updated, then it became clear that the SDGs are somehow so attractive that you in the end like structure the strategy around the 17 goals. So that was that's maybe something to kind of, if you compare the global situation. And at the same time, there were countries who hadn't done anything before with sustainable development, and then with the Agenda 2030 started that, and this great enthusiasm that now we're doing this, and then you might have had this like, oh my God, now we're reinventing the wheel again, which is of course how it goes, and certainly SDGs are a little bit different in Agenda 2030 than anything we had before. But these are the, like to tell about the Finnish sustainable development governance framework. There's been since the end of 1990s a commission for sustainable development, gathering like various interest groups in the society, led by Prime Minister, like having very high status. There's been indicator work that has been discussed together with citizens, and inside the like national government, there's been a network for people working in the administration. So certain structures were there already since the 90s. So it was really more like then rethinking what do the SDGs mean for us. Okay, the SDG framework, like it's, I wouldn't actually underestimate this great iconography and the graphic design. So it's really easy to fall in love with this because they are so kind of cool and colorful and beautiful and so on. And but maybe now coming to halfway with that, and having had discussions also with various United Nations bodies in the framework of this global group that I lead, there is certain frustration to the way that SDGs have been approached via single goals. Like you just like cherry pick there, like, okay, this is nice, I take this one, and then I take this one, and now I'm done with SDGs. Like, it was not exactly meant to be like that. It was more like meant to be a whole Agenda 2030, and not just like some goals that are not connected to each other. So these SDGs should also be seen in interaction with each other. And here I could show. I'm just checking that it's correct. Yeah, this is the work we just finalized this summer in our global working group related to climate finance. One SDG, SDG 13A, about mobilizing $100 billion annually for climate action in global south, and also the kind of limitation that such target setting includes. Like, what we concluded was, first of all, that there is no internationally agreed definition on what is climate finance. So from the outset, it's impossible to do any kind of meaningful kind of calculation or assessment if there's no, if all countries calculate it differently. And then secondly, and this is now from performance auditing perspective, where we talk about efficiency and effectiveness. So what does a number 100 billion mean? It says nothing about the effectiveness of the funding, whether it's going for good or whether it's going for irrelevant, or whether it's going even into something that's counterproductive. So that just as an example of the difficulties related to the way the targets have been set. So audit offices, so where I work, have worked globally actively with the SDGs, like right after they were launched, sometime 2016, there was a big project a global project on assessing the preparedness of the governments to implement the SDGs, like what are the structures and how have countries planned to now implement them. And now, once there is already some implementation, we are increasingly auditing the implementation of the Agenda 2030. And just to mention a few examples, for instance, Audit Office of Thailand, they approached in a very ambitious way, like doing research on the topic, like really, and collaborating with the academia before they kind of decided what kind of audits they start to do. And our counterpart in Canada, they have created a structure where every single audit, not financial audit, but these performance audits, they go through this SDG screening, where it's kind of made sure that is this audit relevant from the SDG perspective, how could we integrate the audit into the SDG. So that's a very, very ambitious framework. What we've done in Finland is our conclusion in the audit office was that SDGs maybe as such do not necessarily bring us so much added value, but we took a kind of step backwards to the concept of sustainable development and really started to think like how can we integrate that into audit work. And now we are coming to these three perspectives, which are like, first of all, this combination with economic, environment, and social, like dimensions of sustainability, and there we very much worked with policy coherence. Then secondly, the long-term perspective, and third, the spillovers. So first, about policy coherence, one maybe, I would say the best example of policy incoherence is subsidies to fossil fuels. So it is from this effectiveness of taxpayers' money, how to spend taxpayers' money. I think it's just such a good and bad example. Like on the one hand, government tries to invest in some measures that tackle climate change. Time you have usually much more subsidies for fossil fuels. What could it be in the field of energy taxation or in the field of transport that actually lead the development into the opposite direction, so offsetting each other's. So that's maybe a very good example of policy incoherence. And yes, and this discussion about kind of calculating this harmful funding for climate, that has been there for some time, and now one rising area is biodiversity, like how could you analyze the funding that's actually harmful for biodiversity. So I see that as a big area of development where also the science is working and where the input of researchers is very much needed. One good example, another kind of globally topical example is this planetary health or One Health, like the understanding that everything's interlinked and the health of our ecosystem is somehow linked to the health of human. And if you think of the root causes of pandemic, many agree that it's interlinked with the way how we unsustainably treat the ecosystems. And coming back to the SDGs and policy coherence, this is still one kind of schematic picture that we tried to do. I don't know whether it's very successful, but we really tried to squeeze into one cube these various perspectives. Like policy coherence could be coherence between various like government sectors, let's say environment, agriculture, health, education, So this horizontal approach, but it could be also vertical between various government levels, like all the way from the United Nations to the cities. And now there are some tools available that try to answer to this call that we cannot treat, that we should also pay attention to the interaction between the SDGs. And this is one tool that we've tested together in the global working group and with the students in the University of Helsinki. So it's a kind of cross-impact matrix where participants are asked to puzzle the interlinkages, like how does progress in one goal or target affect the progress in another target. And then you kind of get out of this result, this matrix, like there you see tensions between, particularly between SDG 8.1 about sustaining per capita economic growth, and with 14, 15, which deal with marine pollution, terrestrial pollution, and combating desertification. And here's another like way it describes, like there you see this 17.11 about like increasing the exports from developing countries is furthest away of the target 14.1, which is reducing marine pollution. So in this picture, those SDGs that are closer each other kind of mean that there's more coherence between them. And these are kind of test rounds that we've had. What students and also our colleagues have said as a feedback is that it's valuable in a sense that it really makes you think. It's not always very easy, and of course it's subjective as well. But anyway, maybe the really biggest value is there that you have to ponder, like, okay, what is the relationship between this and some other target? And this is not the only tool that there's available, but I guess these tools can be very, very useful. In the global group, I mentioned earlier that we worked last 3 years with climate finance, but we worked also with plastic waste and sustainable transport. And here's just a quick question for you to think, like 30 seconds. Like, what do you think could be the interlinkage between plastic waste and transport? I mean, there could be, of course, several interlinkages. Like one answer that I've got is like, okay, you could, or it was actually one country that explained that, yeah, they are getting rid of the plastic waste by putting it into the road pavements. And then it was a bit like, oh, how about the soil pollution? Yes, please. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. And when you collect these various also recycled waste parts like that, that also certainly creates transport. Yeah, very, very good. Then one that we found in this, like puzzling the interlinkages, one example, additional example is the fact that car tires are the biggest airborne source of microplastics and this particulate matter that is harmful to our health. So now when we are so much talking about electric vehicles, they certainly are good for reducing NOx in the urban environments or low-level ozone, but they are absolutely not helping with the microplastics or this particulate matter. So that's just an example. Like if you cross-check between these, you might find something interesting. So actually, electric cars are making the situation worse because they are heavier. So they're not necessarily like solving all of the problems in this world. Cool. Yeah. Next, I would go to another topic. So I don't know if you want to comment or something.
Thank you, Vivi, for this first block. And in fact, Vivi managed already to get you in. Are there any additional ideas you want to express, to let us know? Once again, the idea was to make clear that if you talk about the SDGs, you all the time have to have in mind the 17 SDGs with all their sub-details, etc. And the interlinkages between these SDGs are very, very important. And you simply have to figure out what kind of interlinkages are there. So concrete examples like plastic waste might illustrate what an interlinkage is. There are thousands of others, and interestingly enough, the scientific work which we quoted beforehand, they made clear that there is already a lot of evidence, and now it's a good question to find the right, let's say, approach to implement either in the city or somewhere else a specific approach. Before we go to the second block, is there anything you want to get rid of and say, hey, this is something I want to discuss with us, with you? Okay. I think that was the hardest task in order to make clear that there is, let's say, some kind of a frame or umbrella. And now we go into another detail of the so-called long-term perspectives.
And before that, I would still say something about this understanding the interlinkages and seeing the big picture. It certainly doesn't mean that you have to do everything, like you have to, like if you are a company or a city or something, like trying to include it all. Like it doesn't mean that. Certainly you have to have those priorities, but you should be somehow like honest with trying to do this assessment, also like taking the others into account, and not just picking that what's most convenient to you. So maybe such an addition here, because you can see also that many sustainable development strategies might fail because they try to just cover everything. So that's not necessarily the way to go either. Okay, so about long-term perspective. So coming back to the concept of sustainable development, so it's really very much about future generations. It's this intergenerational perspective and the time span that goes beyond the usual. Like quite often in let's say in policy making, it's the 4-year like election cycle, and you should, if you take sustainable development seriously, you should be able to look much further into the future. And now looking at Agenda 2030, like in year 2015, it was 15 years. Like okay, tiny bit of longer than usually, but still not intergenerational. So even like looking beyond the Agenda 2030. And then SDGs are of course a kind of child of their time, 2015. They reflect the problems that were identified then. And now, if you think we've been gone through pandemic, and you try to see whether SDGs say something about that, well, not not so much. So if SDGs would be created now, they might look a little bit different. So I'm quite sure this, let's say, One Health perspective would be stronger there. And it's interesting to see what comes after 2030, certainly something, and at some point, like the preparation for that starts as well. So, and if I look from my profession's perspective, like auditors, well, this applies to, I guess, like researchers as well. Like there's this twin challenge, kind of like when we do our assessments, do we remember to ask like whether, okay, in our case, government has made the assessment with sufficiently long time perspective. Like it's quite often when you read various plans, and so it might be not even very specific, like what's actually the target year. It's somewhere it gets vague, but to really ask like, okay, all of the background assessment, with what kind of time perspective have they been made? And at the same time, critically thinking our own work, like when we make recommendations, do we also take care of the sufficiently long time perspective? So it's also a kind of space for self-reflection, as it is with the policy coherence. Like, do we only look at the like a narrow one measure, one funding, and do we pay enough attention to the bigger picture? So there are some topics where this long-term perspective comes quite naturally. This is just an example that UK National Audit Office have made on nuclear decommissioning. So there, quite understandably, the time scale is long because the problem we are dealing here with has impacts to the God knows how long, but like the time frame you have in this figure is like we'll be all dead by then. So that's a specific topic where the long time perspective comes quite naturally, or at least it should come. But the point is here, like, should we also have sufficiently long time perspective also in other topics? And and here we come quite close also to the discussion on foresight, like how to develop methods to build this foresight perspective. And there are some interesting examples, like for instance in Finland, there's in the parliament a committee for futures committee, like a committee that tries to develop the future perspective, and that particular committee has also been quite active in Agenda 20 assessments of Agenda 2030. I don't know if you have something similar in Germany, we can talk about that, but one concrete example then, a longer term perspective, is this whether we are locking in with our current decisions to certain structures that might prevent the sustainability transition. So it could be like decision made between transport modes, like whether we invest in roads instead of rails, such things. And now, currently very, very topical is the building up the infrastructure around liquefied natural gas. So now, in order to tackle the energy crisis, are we building up a structure that actually keeps us there longer? That is necessary in order to move on with the energy transition. So it's a very, 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 very topical question. And then talking about climate change adaptation, I think the latest IPCC report on adaptation like really raised this topic of maladaptation. So if we want to adapt into climate change, it's not just like any adaptation that you should be doing, but also that should happen in a wise manner, because otherwise, again, those adaptation actions might be harmful in the longer term perspective. And here is yet another example now from World Economic Forum. It's been quite interesting to see this assessment. Okay, we might be very critical towards who's been asked and what's the methodology and so on, but it's still a sign of something that recently in this World Economic Forum risk assessments, these particularly like environmental risks get a bigger role. And especially here in this slide, if you, I don't know how well you can read that, but there's like risks with 1 to 2 years, 2 to 5 years, and 5 to 10 years. And particularly when we go towards this longer perspective, then the green risks, which are related to environment, get more pronounced. So there's climate action failure, extreme weather, biodiversity loss, natural resource crisis, and human environmental damage. So that's interesting that these come present also there. Good. So this was what I have on longer time perspective. I don't know if you would wish to discuss about this further.
Thank you, Vivi. We still have a set of concrete examples in the third block, but we thought that this second block was also, or is, interesting for you, because it really tries to build the bridge time-wise. And once again, if I recall a country like Finland, there is all the time a long-term perspective, but in a very strategic way. So remember Finland. I presume you're familiar with the geography. It's a huge geography. I think it's twice the size of Germany, as far as I recall it. You are the expert.
Yeah. Tiny bit smaller, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do remember that strategic decisions are taken very much in Finland because of the geography and the small number of inhabitants, just 5 million people on this huge area of a country. So what is your experience in that respect, Vivi?
Oh, are you talking about current decisions being made, or yeah? Yeah, well, geography, yeah, indeed. Yeah, certainly. I guess it's been a big topic in whole Europe, and how quickly the let's say political events in East can affect like our lives in the West, and that's actually like if we think the progress that's currently taking place, let's say with renewable energy, especially in Europe. So it's big, it's massive, and it definitely doesn't come from the SDGs. It comes quite from because of other reasons. So if you now try to find something, I don't even dare to say positive, but something that this crisis with the invasion of Russia has created is that it has been speeding up the energy transition. That's probably quite clear, but there are then these risks related to, let's say, locking into liquefied natural gas or so on. But and how it's also come to the everyday of the everyday lives of people. Like now you talk about energy, weather. Many people have the apps with energy spot prices. I also do, and then like, oh, now it's going to be several windy days. Okay, energy price goes low. Like how much it's actually dependent on the weather as well. And typically in Nordic electricity markets, like the fact whether it has rained in Norway, so whether there's a lot of hydropower available affects the prices. And now it's very much like Finland has also built up the wind energy capacity, like this, whether it's windy or not, it affects a lot. And now when the energy market is more and more interlinked, you can see it also at the European level. Any comments?
We were aware of the fact that these two blocks might be a bit difficult to understand, but they in fact go into, let's say, the characteristics of the SDGs, because this is a very complex issue and you have to dive into in order to better understand not only the interrelationships but also this long-term perspectives of the SDGs as such. But I think we now go to the, let's say, concrete examples, and then you might be even better be able to understand what Finland is doing in order, to get these interlinkages into practical life. And as we said with the title of this lecture, in science and practice, because we all deal with, let's say, processes in either social terms or institutional terms, and we still have to find ways to get the work done till 2030. Are you ready for the third block, Vivi?
Yeah, sure. So our third perspective to sustainable development deals with these so-called spillovers. So first, to the background, like if you take Agenda 2030 as a global agenda seriously, it means that you can't just look inside your country borders, but you also have to kind of have the global perspective and puzzle like how the decisions that you do in your countries impact other countries and their ability to fulfill the SDG targets. So it's not, I mean, if it is a global agenda, then certainly you should pay attention to the spillovers. And what are spillovers? They are like unintended consequences elsewhere. Like you do something which is good and useful to you, but it might have some unintended consequences elsewhere. Like one example, maybe already worn out example, but anyway, is the biofuel. Like in Europe, yes, we might have a target that we need to have this and that much like biofuel from plant-based sources, and what could happen is that you start to import palm oil from other parts of the country, and you're happy because you fulfill your target. But what happens there elsewhere? This might increase the production of palm oil, which very likely could have negative impacts on the biodiversity, which might actually reduce the production of food, which might cause malnutrition. So just this kind of example, like the policy choices we make, if they are not planned wisely and assessed properly, there might be some very harmful consequences elsewhere in the world. So this spillover is a concept that tries to bring these unintended consequences visible. So in an ideal world, like the decision we do domestically, they shouldn't have harmful impacts elsewhere. And I have here two examples. Like these spillovers are something, they are quite, I'd say, like a novel area, and we definitely have never considered them in our national, let's say, audits. But this is something like that we try to bring in. Like yes, they've been there. If you let's say assess the development aid, then certainly they've been there. Like whether development aid is effective and and fulfills the criteria of good governance and so on, but in any domestic policy, like usually this global interlinkage has not been made. So this is indeed a new area that we are slowly trying to develop. And now also the national sustainable development policy has awakened to this topic. And for instance, in the latest voluntary national review that countries provide to United Nations, so that's where also the Finnish voluntary national review talks about the spillovers and the need to study these. Should I explain voluntary national review shortly? Oh my God, there's so many questions or topics. But anyway, like the follow-up mechanism of Agenda 2030. So there are, first of all, global indicators, like global level indicators that measure the progress. And then United Nations publishes these reports. But the other follow-up mechanism is built on a voluntary basis, that countries are called to provide voluntary national reviews to United Nations high-level political forum that meets always in July. And that's kind of interesting mechanism because we have, for instance, our counterpart in Indonesia even audited the voluntary national review. How we might see that in Finland is more like, well, in my office, well, that's kind of marketing material. So no, well, that might be an approach as well, to really go like ask, like, okay, like what do you write there? Is this even true in a first place? But that's interesting mechanism, but it's the point that it's built on a voluntary basis. There is anyway advice how it should be built. It might be also a way to waken up countries, and once they are doing like writing that review, that maybe like wakening up, like what are the topics where should we do better. And now, interesting initiative, like you also know about that, or have studied that some cities have also started to do like voluntary local reviews of their sustainable development work. So it would be great to hear your comments on that a bit later. But before that, I show you two examples, like how we've tried to approach this together with students at the University of Helsinki. Like a year ago, in our course, we concentrated on mining, which is actually a big topic in Finland. There are like some rare earth material available in Finland, and there's always big tension if there are mines, if there are plans to open up a new mines, like people who are living in the area are very strongly opposing them. And that's also a very, very difficult issue then from this global perspective. Like we anyway know that we are dependent on those minerals. We all, if we talk about rare earth materials, we all want our cell phones, we want our iPhones and Teslas if we can afford. So we need those, but okay, we don't want to have mines like somewhere elsewhere. And that's a bit of this question of global justice as well, I'd say. And this is just one visual attempt to find out, for instance, the refining of cobalt and what kind of like really complicated flows there are, and how Congo, as the biggest mine of cobalt, like how there comes material to a refinery in Finland, and how it's very hard to have any mechanisms where you could be 100% sure that there's no child labor included in the mining, and it's really a complicated world. And this is from I think 4 years ago, when students, for instance, try to study the flows of plastic waste from Europe to elsewhere in the world. And first of all, what they found that there was no data available. Quite a valuable finding, actually. Like, there was no reliable global level data. But the data they found was actually from Asia. And this data is from the situation from when China had banned the import of plastic, single-use plastic waste from to country. So Europe couldn't anymore like dump single-use plastic to China, and how it affected then countries elsewhere in the Southeast Asia, how this single-use plastic waste started to flow in these countries, and when it was such a sudden process, like then certainly the fears, like what were the mechanisms for them to deal with that waste. And okay, in the end of the day, the question, like, should we here get into terms our own waste, or is it really worth or is it really right to dump it elsewhere? And that example is only about single-use plastic waste, but we can also talk about like e-waste, a very big issue, and certainly many toxic other toxic wastes as well. So that's about spillovers. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, I have that still. Should I continue, or shall we? Yeah, have a. Yeah.
Okay. In fact, this third block is now split into different parts, which is okay. Is there any kind of resonance from your side on spillovers? Is that now clear as a concept? And I presume that by this practical example, you might have understood what spillovers in the sense of the SDGs are. So, as I said, they're interlinked, and their effects are not only retraceable in a country or a local situation, but also worldwide. So we have to take this into consideration as well. By the way, what Vivi mentioned with regard to local voluntary reviews in cities, just to have this as some kind of a break, we are currently in Germany working together with almost 200 cities who, by themselves, analyze their situation and they write a voluntary local review, which is then transferred to the United Nations. So they tell the United Nations how they developed. The city of Bonn, for example, is writing such a review in order to better understand what the situation on the ground is, and then to make others, in that respect the United Nations, be aware of what is on the ground, on data best practices available in order to communicate this properly. Because the SDGs, and there is this target number 11, do you remember? SDG 11 talks about sustainable cities and communities. And this is, let's say, the anchor point for cities, because there it accumulates on this local level where we all live to a certain extent. And cities need to get this local picture of data, of analytics, of development projects better into this global context. Otherwise, the global context will never really recognize what is available on the ground.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually quite interesting, this you talked about self-motivation, like with these national voluntary reviews, it's the same thing. There's absolutely no like sanction if you don't do that, but it's more like maybe then finally the international pressure. And I remember one European country where it was like their government hadn't done any voluntary national review, and then it was, I guess, finally audit office who asked like what is this? Like, why aren't you? And then the power of, oh my God, everyone else is doing this. It could be actually quite strong. Yeah. Mm. And let's say the fact, like countries of course compare them with each other, and then the fact that someone mentions spillovers in their review can be actually a powerful thing. I could continue, like I have one one more slide on the spillovers, but first I want to say that this is something that's been developed by so-called SDG index and dashboard. It's a already work that's been going on, I guess, 10 years or something, like an annual analysis of the progress of the countries against SDGs. It's Sustainable Development Solutions Network and Bertelsmann Stiftung that have been developed that. And why I kind of particularly really appreciate this project is that they've tried to develop indicators measuring spillovers. Because even though you would understand like what they are about, it's really very hard to measure them. And so here are some of the approaches, like how this particular project approaches them. Like first, environmental and social spillovers embodied in trade, like that through trade you try to get these impacts you try to find them, whether it's related to social responsibility or environmental responsibility. There are also direct cross-border flows related to air pollution, water pollution, and international economic and financial flows related to tax havens and kind of this unfair international competition. And then finally, peacekeeping and security spillovers, where it could be about armed trades or organized criminality, but also like as a positive element, some peacekeeping efforts. Yes, I'm trying to. Here is a figure like how do this country assessment look like in this dashboard, and now by no means I don't mean to brag about the position of Finland, but quite the contrary. What I'm trying to say that even now the model seems to favor the Nordic model, Nordic system, but that even we have still a lot to do. None of the countries have achieved like SDGs, and Finland is performing the worst when it comes to responsible consumption and production and climate action. So there's still a lot to be done. And there on the right-hand side, you see the International Spillover Index, and it means the smaller it is, the worse is the situation. So it's somewhere possibly even tiny bit of below the OECD members. And then if you look at the sub-Saharan Africa or Oceania, it's different. I don't know if you've heard about this concept of double inequality that's discussed particularly in the context of climate change, like meaning that those countries who are least responsible of climate change are the ones who are suffering the most. So it's really this kind of double inequality that actually this spillover index also reflects. If you look at sub-Saharan Africa or Oceania and the fact in these low-lying island states who are the first who are suffering from the sea level rise, and where the climate change is really an existential question. Yeah, like coming back to where we started and the quote of this international meta-study and the situation in Finland, like I think it reflects very well the situation that we have. Like the governance structure is there, it's been there already a long time, and even the budget book mentions sustainable development and SDGs. But when it comes to allocating the money, there the interlinkage is not necessarily so much anymore there. So it's very much about this discursive change. Sustainable development is there even more so because of the SDGs. But talking about are we halfway there? That's definitely only the halfway or beyond or like not even there yet. So yes, I think that's I mentioned it earlier, like where I wanted to end this is that that, for instance, the energy transition that's hopefully happening now, like it's not really being fueled by the SDGs, but other much more dramatic events. On the other hand, the discussion around the SDGs and so might have like prepared then the shifts that are hopefully taking place towards moving to more sustainable direction.
Thank you very much. I hope that you are all familiar with this concept of a dashboard. Does that ring a bell? Is that clear as a concept as such? In fact, you try to measure yourself against a given target, right? And then you can decide whether you have reached a target or whether you are still far away from it. Of course, it's a question of how to set the targets by yourself, the figures as such. But I think it's, in that respect, very helpful, and that is the initiative of SDN, in order to better understand how single countries are performing in this context. And I'm a fan of Finland. I know that it was good by Vivi to also mention most of the time Finland is placed number one, but of course there are some kind of details to talk about. But I think it's good to know that, as we said, this is a process as such that we still have to work quite a lot on it in order to implement the Agenda 2030. Obviously, Finland has this, let's say, governance structure, you know, people are talking to each other, institutions are talking to each other, which might not be the case in other countries. This is what I simply want to say. And in that respect, these dashboards might simply help you to better understand where you are in this process, to visualize the progress or even regress. Any resonance, feedback from your side? Is that something totally new to you, or are you familiar with these kind of, let's say, measuring ways of trying to quantify sustainability, but knowing that at the same time there is also a qualitative effect or part? So you need best practices in order to convince others, a concrete example. But I think these kind of dashboards are very helpful, at least for a nation or a broader geographical context, to better understand where you go to and where not. What I would like to raise also is that sustainability, you know, is a triangle, right? So it's social, economic, and ecological to a certain extent. And it became, by literature, also some kind of a quadrate. So this governance aspect or the cultural aspect of your country is also determining the way you define, how you define what sustainability is and how you implement it. But the thing is that when I read the articles and all kind of work, what Vivi mentions, it turns out that it became some kind of more ecological than others. But sustainability, once again, is a triangle. And what is interesting with the SDGs is that, and this is, by the way, put on the agenda this year for the high-level political forum, Vivi mentioned it as a platform where you can present yourself as a city or an institution to say, this is my way of handling sustainable development, is that the social notion is put on the agenda. And in that respect, SDG 10, reducing inequalities, Vivi mentioned it also. So reducing the inequalities in a country between different groups of citizens, between different actors, but also between different countries becomes more and more important. Because obviously sustainability so far has, let's say, left aside the social question, but it comes now in again. And with these dashboards, you can easily also illustrate what this social question really means in practical work.
I could just comment here that the concept of just transition I think that's so topical, and that really well connects these 3 dimensions of sustainable development. So just transition is about like when we hopefully move towards a carbon neutral society, like what happens to those people who have been traditionally dependent on carbon production. So a big question, for instance, in Poland with the coal miners, what happens to them? How do we support them? In Finland, a much minor question, but we've used peat for energy production. So what does happen to those people who have produced peat? Like, how do you support them in order to make sure that they don't suffer about the transition? And there's also big funding now available at the EU level, also related to just transition. So I think it quite nicely, it's a nice example of bringing these various aspects together. And at the same time, certainly that affects the acceptability of climate policies as well.
Okay. Anything you, again, want to get rid of? Have you managed to understand what the SDGs are, how Finland is trying to find its place into this context? Once again, referring to the fact that sustainable development has a long tradition in Finland. As we said, governance structures are there, although the geography is a bit different than ours or in other countries. And what I really like with the work of Vivi is that putting the finger into the wound of money, trying to better understand where in a national budgets are most probably misspent, or at least to try to figure out and report to the parliament, there you should pay attention, there you should adjust. And in that respect, I don't know whether you're familiar with the work of auditing. This is mainly about figures, it's about numbers, but it's very important, according to my understanding, and the research shows that it works, to say, okay, if we talk about funds or money, financial flows, we might be also even in an institutional sense be able to say this is sustainable or this is unsustainable.
Like just using any like research methods, like when we study topics, we might make surveys, we might make statistical analysis, we always do some interviews. Sometimes, depending on the topic, we might rely more in the interviews. Like a normal, I'd say, research methods, and also some maybe all basically any method that's suitable for the topic, and triangulation, if you know, like methodological triangulation, like using various sources. Always look at documents, do analysis of them, and now perhaps all of this data mining and the artificial intelligence certainly provides new avenues like for any research and auditing as well. So yeah, definitely digitalization provides many new possibilities. It could be also in some geographic information system if the topic requires it.
Thank you for raising this point. Not directly linked to financial funds, but also an option is, and that I've been trying to stress in the courses I teach here, is to use satellite data in order to better understand the land use or type of land use. And then to say, you know, there you might have a bad or a good development in that respect. And you might know or you have received the information that by April, for example, the Copernicus program of the European Union, providing the global human settlement layer and respective information, is available in a new set of information. So they updated their data sets, which you can use as an information base to better understand the type of land use in a city, differentiating between, let's say, build-up area with regard to housing, build-up area with regard to industrial sites, rivers, forests, whatever. And this is also in financial terms, I know it from Switzerland, very much linked to the question, where do we spend public funds? In order to better understand, you know, how someone took care of the piece of land he owns, or is the person who rents it, for example. So I think this remote sensing data, as you call it scientifically correct, is also something which you could more and more use, and the information is publicly available, so you can easily download the data sets and link them. So this is more, let's say, a classical way of using given data. You don't generate it, but you link it either to surveys or what Vivi mentioned to the analysis to a certain set of documents. And as far as I understood, but she is the expert with regard to Finland, you simply screen your national budget and say, oh, this budget line goes into that direction, the other one into another one. And you usually, with national budgets, you have descriptions of what you spend your money for what. Okay. Vivi, thank you very much. Thank you very much to you for attending such a complex issue like the SDGs. I hope that we made clear that you can answer this question of halfway done in a positive or negative way, whether the glass is half full or half empty. But I think it very much, and this shows an example like Finland, it very much, is influenced by the setting you are living in, by the actors which are active or non-active, passive. I would say Finland is on a good way, knowing that still some duties have to be solved. I don't want to talk about Germany because that was not the focus of today. But still we have some years in front of us. In that respect, halfway done, yes and no. Thanks again for your attention, and give us a big round of applause for Vivi. Thank you.